This is stolen valor. The young soldier's accusation echoed through the Fort Bragg training facility as he pointed at the woman's worn military jacket. You're impersonating military personnel. The crowd of recruits gathered around, phones coming out, ready to record what they thought would be another viral confrontation with a fake veteran. She stood there silently, letting them voice their assumptions, their anger, their disrespect. Then, without saying a word, she slowly rolled up her left sleeve. The tattoo that was revealed made every phone lower, every voice quiet, every accusation die in their throats. Because the ink on her arm told a story that no civilian could ever fake. The names of 23 soldiers who had died in a unit that officially never existed. Welcome to True Stories Zone. Before we dive into this incredible story of hidden warriors, forbidden ink, and the moment when the past refuses to stay buried, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. The Advanced Combat Training Center at Fort Bragg was where elite soldiers came to hone their skills and prepare for the most dangerous missions the military had to offer. The facility hummed with constant activity: shooting ranges, tactical courses, equipment testing areas, and briefing rooms where classified operations were planned and executed. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson stood at the facility's main entrance, checking credentials and ensuring that only authorized personnel gained access to the sensitive training areas. At 26, he was young but serious about his responsibilities, having earned his position through exemplary service and an unwavering attention to detail. The woman who approached his checkpoint at 1347 hours didn't fit the usual profile of personnel seeking access to the facility. She appeared to be in her mid-40s, about 5'7", with dark brown hair streaked with premature gray, pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her face was weathered, marked by deep lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into harsh sunlight and stress. She had olive-toned skin, sharp cheekbones, and eyes the color of dark amber that seemed to hold secrets. She wore what looked like a surplus military jacket, faded olive drab with worn patches and no visible unit insignia. The jacket appeared authentic but old, the kind that veterans sometimes wore long after their service ended. Beneath it, she had on dark jeans and combat boots that showed significant wear. Purpose of visit? Sergeant Thompson asked automatically, though something about her bearing suggested she belonged here more than many of the people he usually processed. Training, evaluation, and consultation, she replied quietly, her voice carrying a slight rasp that suggested years of shouting orders over gunfire and aircraft engines. Thompson frowned as he examined her visitor's pass. Ma'am, this authorization is for civilian contractors only, but you're wearing military uniform items. I need to verify your status. The woman, who had identified herself only as Ms. Reyes, met his gaze steadily. I'm here at the request of Colonel Davis for a tactical assessment project. I understand that, ma'am, but regulations are clear. Civilians cannot wear military uniform items on base without proper authorization. I'm going to need you to remove the jacket. What happened next would become the subject of intense discussion throughout Fort Bragg for weeks to come. As Thompson made his demand, several other soldiers in the area began to take notice. Among them was Private First Class Jenkins, a 19-year-old fresh out of basic training who had yet to learn the value of keeping his opinions to himself. Looks like we got another wannabe, Jenkins said loudly enough for others to hear. Probably bought that jacket at an army surplus store and thinks it makes her look military. A few other soldiers chuckled, and soon a small crowd had gathered to watch what they assumed would be a routine enforcement of uniform regulations. To them, this was just another civilian who needed to be reminded of her place. Ms. Reyes stood silently as the comments grew more pointed. Someone mentioned stolen valor. Another soldier suggested she might be trying to impersonate military personnel for fraudulent purposes. The accusations came easily, backed by the confidence of people who assumed they knew what they were looking at. Ma'am, Thompson said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when dealing with difficult situations. I'm going to need you to remove that jacket immediately, or I'll have to escort you off the premises. The woman looked around at the gathered soldiers, her expression calm but unreadable. For a moment it seemed like she might simply comply and walk away. Instead, she reached for the zipper of her jacket and began to pull it down, slowly, deliberately. You want to see what's under the jacket? She asked quietly, her voice carrying across the suddenly hushed group. Are you sure about that? Something in her tone made Thompson hesitate, but he had gone too far to back down now. "Ma'am, please comply with the uniform regulations." She unzipped the jacket completely and let it fall from her shoulders, revealing a simple black t-shirt underneath. For a moment the soldiers looked confused. There was nothing remarkable about her civilian clothes. But then she began to roll up her left sleeve, and everything changed. The tattoo that emerged as she rolled up her sleeve was unlike anything most of the gathered soldiers had ever seen. It wasn't the typical military ink that many service members wore: unit crests, patriotic symbols, or decorative designs. This was something else entirely. Covering most of her left forearm was an intricate design that had clearly been created by someone with both artistic skill and deep military knowledge. At the center was a black dagger, its blade pointing downward, piercing through a detailed rendering of dog tags. Around the dagger, scrollwork contained names, dozens of them, inscribed in precise military font. But what made the entire room fall silent was the banner beneath the design. In bold letters that looked like they had been burned rather than tattooed, it read, "Shadow Company, Operation Nightfall, KIA, Never Forgotten." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Private Jenkins, who had been making jokes moments before, stared at the tattoo with wide eyes. Several of the more experienced soldiers in the group recognized what they were looking at, and their faces showed a mixture of awe and disbelief. Staff Sergeant Thompson felt his stomach drop as he read the inscription. Shadow Company was a name he had heard whispered in certain circles, a special operations unit that had allegedly operated in the most dangerous zones during the height of operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. But according to official records, no such unit had ever existed. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered from the back of the crowd. "That's a Shadow Company memorial tattoo." Ms. Reyes finished rolling up her sleeve and stood with her arm extended, letting everyone see the full design. The tattoo was clearly old. The black ink had the slightly faded quality that came with years of exposure to sun and time. But the artwork was remarkable in its detail and precision. "Shadow Company was officially disbanded in 2019, she said quietly, her voice carrying easily in the hushed space. 47 soldiers served in that unit over its operational period. 23 of them never came home." She pointed to the names inscribed around the dagger. "Every name on this tattoo represents someone who died during operations that your government will never acknowledge. Men and women who gave their lives for missions that don't exist in any official record." Thompson stared at the tattoo, trying to process what he was seeing and hearing. "Ma'am, I don't understand. If the unit was classified, how do you know about it?" For the first time since the confrontation began, Ms. Reyes smiled, a sad, knowing expression that contained more history than most people accumulated in a lifetime. "Because I was Shadow Company's operations sergeant," she said simply. "Call sign, Reaper 6. The effect of her words was immediate and profound. Several soldiers stepped back instinctively, as if they were in the presence of something dangerous. Others leaned forward, trying to get a better look at the tattoo and the woman who wore it. Staff Sergeant Thompson found himself in a position he had never expected to face. Military regulations were clear about civilian attire and unauthorized uniform items, but they said nothing about how to handle someone who claimed to be a member of a unit that didn't officially exist. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I'm going to need to verify this through my chain of command." "Of course you are," she replied, rolling her sleeve back down. "But you might want to call Colonel Davis first. I believe he's expecting me." Thompson radioed his supervisor, and within minutes, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Davis arrived at the checkpoint. Davis was a veteran officer with 23 years of service, known for her no-nonsense approach to command and her encyclopedic knowledge of special operations units. When she saw Miss Reyes, her expression changed immediately. "Sergeant Major Martinez," she said formally, using a rank and name that none of the gathered soldiers had heard before. "Thank you for coming." The crowd of soldiers exchanged confused glances. Martinez? But she had identified herself as Reyes, and Sergeant Major was a rank reserved for the most senior enlisted personnel, far above what anyone would expect from a woman who had appeared to be a civilian contractor. "Colonel," Martinez replied with the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to military protocol, "I understand there's been some confusion about my authorization to be here." Davis looked around at the gathered soldiers, her expression making it clear that she was not pleased with what she saw. "Sergeant Thompson, these soldiers have duties to attend to. I suggest they return to them immediately." The crowd began to disperse, but not quickly. Many of the soldiers lingered, hoping to hear more of a conversation that seemed to promise revelations about operations they had never heard of. "Sergeant Major Martinez," Davis continued once most of the soldiers had moved away, "I apologize for any misunderstanding. Your credentials should have been processed through special channels." "No problem, Colonel. I understand why your people were confused. Most of my identification doesn't exist in standard databases." Thompson, who was still processing everything he had witnessed, finally found his voice. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I don't understand what's happening here. Are you military or civilian? And why doesn't your name match your visitor's pass?" Colonel Davis and Martinez exchanged a look that suggested they were accustomed to this kind of confusion. "Sergeant Thompson," Davis explained, "Sergeant Major Martinez operates under multiple identification profiles for security reasons. Her work involves assessment of special operations training protocols, which requires her to maintain operational security even on domestic installations." Martinez nodded. "The name on my visitor's pass is one of several I'm authorized to use. Shadow Company personnel learn to operate under multiple identities as a matter of survival." Over the following hour, in a secure briefing room away from curious ears, Martinez explained the reality behind Shadow Company and her presence at Fort Bragg. What she revealed painted a picture of military operations that existed in the gray areas between official policy and operational necessity. Shadow Company had been formed in 2015 as a deep penetration special operations unit, tasked with missions that required complete deniability. The unit consisted of soldiers selected from various Special Forces backgrounds, Rangers, Special Forces, Delta Force, and others, who were given new identities and operated outside normal command structures. "We were ghosts," Martinez explained to Colonel Davis and a small group of senior officers who had been cleared to hear her briefing. "No official records, no acknowledgement of our existence, no support beyond what was absolutely necessary for mission completion." The unit had operated primarily in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and several African nations, conducting reconnaissance, direct action, and counter-terrorism operations that the United States could not officially acknowledge. Their success rate had been extraordinary, but the cost had been high. 23 KIA in 4 years of operations, Martinez continued, her voice steady but carrying the weight of remembered loss. "Every one of them died in a country where we weren't supposed to be, fighting enemies that our government couldn't officially engage." The tattoo on her arm represented more than just military service. It was a memorial to soldiers whose sacrifice could never be publicly acknowledged. Each name inscribed in the scrollwork around the dagger represented someone who had died far from home, whose family had been told they were killed in training accidents or non-combat incidents. "Why are you here now?" asked Major Williams, one of the officers in the briefing. "Because the military is making the same mistakes that got my people killed," Martinez replied bluntly. "I've been tasked with evaluating current special operations training protocols and identifying deficiencies that could lead to unnecessary casualties." She gestured toward her tattooed arm. "This ink represents hard-learned lessons about what happens when operations are planned by people who have never been in the field. My job is to make sure the next generation of special operators doesn't end up as names on someone else's memorial tattoo." Over the following week, Martinez conducted her evaluation of Fort Bragg's training protocols with the full cooperation of base personnel. Her assessment was comprehensive, covering everything from individual marksmanship training to complex multi-unit tactical exercises. What she found was a mixture of impressive capabilities and dangerous gaps in preparation. The soldiers were well trained in conventional tactics and possessed excellent technical skills, but they lacked the kind of adaptability and improvisation that Shadow Company operations had required. "You're training soldiers to fight the last war," she explained to Colonel Davis during one of their daily briefings, "but the next war is going to require people who can think on their feet, operate without support, and make life or death decisions based on incomplete information." Her recommendations were detailed and specific. She suggested modifications to training scenarios that would better prepare soldiers for the psychological challenges of deep penetration operations. She identified equipment deficiencies that could prove fatal in hostile environments. Most importantly, she emphasized the need for training that prepared soldiers to operate effectively when everything went wrong. Shadow Company's success wasn't based on perfect planning or superior equipment, she told a group of training instructors. It was based on soldiers who could adapt to impossible situations and still complete their missions. The tattoo on her arm served as a constant reminder of what was at stake. During training exercises, soldiers would catch glimpses of the memorial ink and understand that they were receiving instruction from someone who had paid the price for the lessons she was teaching. Martinez's assessment of Fort Bragg's training programs resulted in significant changes to special operations preparation protocols. Her recommendations were implemented not just at Fort Bragg, but at special forces installations across the military. The story of her confrontation at the facility checkpoint became part of military folklore, a reminder that expertise and sacrifice don't always come in the form that people expect. The soldiers who had initially questioned her authorization learned valuable lessons about making assumptions based on appearances. Staff Sergeant Thompson, who had demanded that she remove her jacket, was profoundly affected by the experience. He later requested additional training in recognizing special operations personnel and understanding the unique challenges faced by soldiers who operated outside normal military structures. Private First Class Jenkins, who had made jokes about wannabes and stolen valor, found himself assigned to additional duties that included researching the history of special operations units. His education about the sacrifices made by soldiers like those in Shadow Company left him with a deeper respect for service that couldn't be measured by visible symbols or official recognition. But perhaps the most significant impact was on the training protocols themselves. Martinez's insights, purchased with the blood of her fallen comrades, helped prepare a new generation of special operators for the realities of modern warfare. Sergeant Major Elena Martinez left Fort Bragg as quietly as she had arrived, boarding a commercial flight to her next assignment. To most observers, she appeared to be just another middle-aged woman traveling on business, her secrets hidden beneath the sleeve of an ordinary jacket. But at special operations installations across the military, her legend grew. Training instructors began incorporating her methodologies into their programs. Soldiers learned to recognize that experience and expertise didn't always announce themselves with visible symbols or official credentials. The tattoo on her arm remained her most powerful credential, a memorial that spoke to the cost of the knowledge she carried. Each name inscribed in the ink represented hard-learned lessons about survival, adaptation, and the price of serving in operations that the world would never acknowledge. Years later, when soldiers completed training programs that incorporated Martinez's recommendations, they would sometimes ask about the origins of specific techniques or protocols. Their instructors would tell them about Shadow Company, about soldiers who operated in the shadows so that others could serve in the light. And sometimes they would mention the tattoo, the memorial ink that carried the names of heroes whose sacrifice could never be officially recognized, but would never be forgotten by those who understood the true cost of freedom. Elena Martinez continued her work, moving from base to base, evaluating training programs and sharing knowledge that had been purchased with blood. Her identity remained fluid, her presence temporary, but her impact was permanent, because some lessons can only be taught by those who have lived them, and some teachers carry their credentials not in certificates or official records, but in the scars and ink that tell stories too important to forget. The Shadow Company memorial tattoo served as a reminder that heroism doesn't always receive public recognition, that the most important service often happens in darkness, and that sometimes the most valuable teachers are those who appear ordinary until the moment they reveal the extraordinary truth of their experience. In a world where service is often measured by visible symbols and official acknowledgement, Martinez represented something different, the quiet professional who carried her qualifications in memories and ink, who taught through example rather than rhetoric, and who honored the fallen by ensuring their sacrifice contributed to the survival of others. Her sleeve remained rolled down most of the time, hiding the memorial that defined her mission. But when the moment required it, when assumptions needed to be challenged and respect needed to be earned, she would reveal the ink that spoke louder than any uniform or official credential ever could. Because some truths are too important to remain hidden, and some teachers carry their authority not in ranks or titles, but in the permanent reminders of what they've witnessed, survived, and learned in service to something greater than themselves.